Welcome to the Forest Analytics Landing Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Russell. In this podcast, we'll talk about how data and analytics are transforming the forest products industry. We'll share how a research-based approach to analytics can empower your forestry organization to make better decisions with your data. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Today, I want to talk about research in forestry, specifically the research and development capacity within the forestry sector. I'll just start by saying there's been a lot of great articles on this, particularly in the Journal of Forestry and some other places in the last 5 years or so, that really talks about the challenges that we have in the forestry sector with research and development capacity. And so I'll mention a few of those articles and we'll link to them in the notes as well. I'm also, in November 22, I've written a series of 5 posts as a part of my LinkedIn newsletter that goes into more depth about some of the issues and some of the attributes of forestry research and development kind of as it stands today. And so I'll be sure to link to those as well. And they provide a lot of the graphs and some of the visualizations that I've done with some data sets that really look at this in a little bit more depth. And so the paper that I think really highlights the challenges in forestry research in a lot of great detail is a paper by McGinley and others in 2019 that focused on research and development within forestry. And in their paper, they say that the research capacity within the forestry sector continues to erode. And those 3 words, continues to erode, have come up quite a bit as I've talked to other people and heard others talk about the need for more research in the forestry sector. And so there are some novel solutions that might be required that really get us above this, which I'll talk about near the end. But I think that there is a lot of information that we can use to better understand, first, the problem that we have in the forestry sector when it comes to research. The thing about if you compare what we invest in forestry to other sectors, there's some data that shows that the wood products industry invests about 0.6% of its total sales in research and development. And so that number alone might not mean much, but if you look at other sectors, it is quite low. And so if you compare it to the automobile industry, the car industry, automobile industry, spends about 3.5% of its sales on research and development. And then software development, it's about the same. And so there's lots and lots of investment in those industries, and that number kind of provides some perspective in where we're at in forestry. Now, there's a lot of reasons behind this. One of the things that the McGinley paper points out is just the increasing other factors that influence money in forestry, particularly wildfires. If you think about all the money spent by the U.S. Forest Service on fighting wildfires, it's a tremendous expense. And so they have a great set of graphics that show that the amount of funding at the federal level and in some of the other private and university level funding has actually decreased over time as a result of a lot of these factors that go into the declining research capacity within forestry. There's also been a lot of changes to the ownership of our forests. And so in the last several decades, there's been a lot more transition from private landowners to more of the timber investment management organizations and real estate investment trusts. And a lot of the forestry researchers that used to be really prevalent in a lot of private organizations and companies, their roles kind of transitioned, or a lot of those positions maybe weren't filled. And so just the changing ownership patterns away from privately held lands to more of the TIMOs and REITs has really changed some of the ownership, obviously the ownership patterns, but also what it's meant for our research capacity. And also I think there's been a lot of changes within university systems. A lot of universities, forestry departments have rebranded themselves. Their names are, maybe they include the word forest in them, or maybe they don't. But anyway, a lot of departments have tried to appeal to a broader number of students. A lot of faculty are stressed and lots of things going on for faculty. And so that might mean a decline in some of the applied research that's been going on across the last decade or two. One of the things that the paper points out is just quantifying the number of forest scientists. And so they compare numbers in 2002 to 2016, and they find a difference of about 12%. And so in 2016, there were 12% fewer forestry researchers than in 2002. And so that's a number that's changed quite a bit. And it's meant a lot of changes and a lot fewer people doing forestry research compared to almost 2 decades ago. Another paper published in the Journal of Forestry focused on what are the doctoral dissertation topics focused on in applied forestry, and what are they researching? And so this is a study done by Wagner and others that really looked at the differences in terms of what's been published on. And what they found is that a lot of what's not been published as frequently have been a lot of the forestry research focused on management. And so there's been a lot more transition more to what we might think about as more of the basic sciences, so understanding processes kind of at a broader level than applied sciences. And so I think that's a really important finding, particularly in forestry, where it seems like it can take decades for a research finding to really hit the ground. That is to say, once people start doing research on it and they have some results that they want to share, it's not like industry and it's not like our forest managers are going to use that information right away. It takes some time. Our trees grow slowly. It takes time to implement research on the ground across larger ownerships across landscapes. So I think that's really important to understand the importance of not only what we're studying, but also understanding that decline in researchers as it relates to our overall forestry research capacity and development. I think another important thing is to understand just what are the issues in forestry research that need to be examined. And so there's been a lot of work on this. There was a recent Forest and Forest Products Research and Development Capacity Summit that happened in 2020 and 2021. And I know a lot of information is beginning to come out on that. That's looking at trying to understand and quantify how the priorities are different between different ownership groups and different stakeholders among the forestry profession, and what that might mean for potential topics, potential priority areas of discovery, might mean for some of our forestry issues across the U.S. especially. And so I think this has been really this need for research, this need for understanding R&D issues as they relate to forestry has been highlighted by many of our groups. I'll point you to also the Society of American Foresters position statement that outlines the need for research and development within the forestry sector as a great information source and as a great kind of one spot to look at for some of this literature and some of this information about the need for research and development. In terms of what are the solutions? Well, obviously more money would help, but just dumping money into a problem doesn't necessarily solve all the issues with it. And so I do want to point out, I'll mention just a couple of different models that we might look to in the agricultural sector. There's a lot of information from them that we might think about looking at in terms of how do we frame some of these research priorities, how do we frame some of these issues so that they relate to us tackling big problems in forestry. I'll first start out by saying that there are a lot of research cooperatives across the U.S. that have been established for 50 years or closer to 60 years that are a great model that has a way of prioritizing forestry research that's more conducted at a regional level. These cooperatives, they typically operate at that regional level, and they might be focused on really one or two disciplines. And so, as an example, the Forest Modeling Research Cooperative at Virginia Tech is focused on growth and yield in loblolly pine systems. The Cooperative Forestry Research Unit, where I'm at here in the University of Maine, is focused on industrial land research priorities in the state of Maine. And so there's lots and lots of regional models like that work really well at the regional level. But if we look larger to the U.S., again, I mentioned some of these agricultural models that we might look at. There's lots of different ones out there, particularly ones that look at a public-private partnership model. There was one of these in the ag sector that was authorized in the U.S. Farm Bill in 2014, and this was the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, or FFAR, is I believe what they're called. And they have a unique model where they have these different challenge areas, and they use public funds allocated to them through the Farm Bill to get some of this work done. And a lot of the funds there are actually matched by private industry. And so you can often garner that one-to-one match or sometimes more through a model like FFAR. There's lots of other organizations too. Canada has a great program through FP Innovations, which is a private nonprofit research and development organization that is really focused on the growth of the Canadian forest sector. And I think it's one that the U.S. can look to in terms of thinking about different ways to fund research in forestry, and how do we, kind of gather these partnerships across different organizations, from federal and state government to private industry to universities. I think they have another great program that we might look to that could definitely provide insights into some of our challenges that we have when it comes to tackling forestry research and our capacity to do research within the forestry sector. And so I hope that's helpful. Just a few thoughts on kind of where we're at in terms of forestry and research when we compare ourselves to other sectors, when we look at the trends in forestry research. We've got a lot of challenges ahead of ourselves, and I think there are some other models that we might look to that could help us in terms of determining how can we improve the amount of forestry research that's done, and also how do we prioritize all the different forestry research that's out there. So thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Forest Analytics Landing Podcast. For more information on how data and analytics can empower your organization, visit arbor-analytics.com.